Service level management in UAM. So this actually enables the administrators to quickly enable the SLAs based on certain objectives, right? And these objectives generally be the agreements that will be made between the clients and service providers, right? So now how these SLAs help our customers when it comes to the infra monitoring. So when we talk about the service level agreements, we generally talk about availability reporting or a kind of what is the data center availability or what is the reachability or how are the overall systems as a whole are functioning in a given organization or a given availability zone or a given region, right? So these service level agreements will actually help us to create reports that can be created at a objective level or at an agreement level which can be shared with different stakeholders of the UM customers, right? So now this is a new SLM that is coming up with an intention to ease the usability with respect to creation of SLAs and then manage the SLAs once the SLAs are created, right? So before I jump into the user interface aspects of it, one step back. So what are the two key components of the service level management in UAM? So the step one is the SLA engine, which is the core engine, which actually does the calculation behind the scenes with respect to the compliance percentage of the service level agreements, and then considering all the operating periods, the maintenance schedules, the exclusion periods, the calculation profiles, right? So all of these will be part of this SLA engine. This is a very concrete component within the UM, which is the core behind the user interface, which I'm going to demo now. Now, along with this component, the second component is the SLM web app, right? So which will be deployed on the operator console web app. So this is one of the web apps that will be deployed along with other web apps on the operator console VASP server, right? You can see SLM over here, right? So this is the SLM web app, which is getting enhanced for a better usability, which I'm going to demo it now, right? So from a point of interaction perspective, service level management can be accessible from the operator console from the left menu over here. Now, once we now land into the service level management, and for the customers who are upgrading to this, all their SLAs will be migrated. And for the customers who are going to create the new SLAs, I'll walk through the new workflows that added up for ease of creation and ease of management. At a very top level, if we see the real estate of the service level management in the from a user interface perspective, right? So the left panel talks about the service level agreements, which can be grouped based on a certain criteria of the SLAs. Like I can have all the service level agreements related to availability, or have all the service level agreements related to certain databases, agreements related to specific technologies, right? So we can have various ways to create these groups. And along with that, we can also have the SLAs created at an account level as well, right? Because UM follows a proper multi-tenant architecture. So even SLAs can also be created at a account level as well, right? So it need not be at a overall domain level. So this is a new left panel that is coming up with a informative icons saying that whether the compliance is breached or the compliance is met, right? So this information we can directly see from here. And then this is the main panel with respect to the summary of all the service level agreements that are deployed in a given environment, right? You can see all the list of SLAs, and you can see specific list of SLAs when we navigate to a particular tree nodes, right? So currently I'm at the root node. And then while I come back to the creation of SLAs by various workflows, I'll also quickly walk through what these functionalities at the top are. So I'll start with operating period. So before we click on creation of an SLA, it's very important that what should be our service level agreement be based on, whether is it a 24/7 operating period, or is it based on certain business hours, or any other custom duration, right? So these operating period functionality will let the users to create the operating periods based on which the service level agreements can be calculated, right? So by default, it will be 24/7. We consider all the samples that we collect by the monitoring probes. But if at all we want to limit the samples that are collected to a specific operating periods, right? In that case, in this case, there is a operating period created specifically for the business hours from Monday to Friday. But you can create, as a user, you can create your own operating periods, and you can refer these operating periods while you're creating the SLAs, right? So you can have multiple combination of days and the time durations while creating these operating periods. So that's a very quick brief about the operating period. I'll come back to this when I create the SLAs. And then the second set is the calculation profiles, right? As we know that service level agreement at a very top level, it contains a list of objectives, right? Which are generally the agreements that that went between a client and a service provider, right? And these objectives could be like, if I am talking about a data center availability, I'm talking about what is the availability of my tier 1 virtual machines, or what is the availability of my tier 2 virtual machines. So these can be converted as objectives. Now what is the availability of all my virtual machines may be a service level agreement, right? Now if at all I want to create a custom calculation model that I want to give more preference to, say, a tier 1 virtual machines rather than a tier 2 devices, right? So we can have these custom calculation profiles. Now, these calculation profiles will be based on two levels. One is the SLO level, which is one level down the SLA, and then is the quas level, which is one level down the SLO. So SLA comprises of SLOs, SLOs comprises of quas messages, right? So now when we create the calculation profiles and we calculate the compliance percentage for quas constraints, are we saying that we'll just go with the raw samples, which is the default, or can we have some kind of a plugins that tells it, okay, I want to consider average of all samples, and if that is breaching the threshold, if you want to derive a certain breach value by, so these kind of calculation methodologies can be created from these calculation profiles, right? So there can be, along with the default calculation profiles, we can leverage these plugins. It mainly talks about average of all the samples, medians, the percentile, right? Similarly, for the SLO calculation, we can have and or based data series. So what does this mean is, when we collect the data series for a quas message for a given period of time, and out of two quas, if one quas did not meet the no threshold, but the other quas has met the compliance, right, or the threshold, so this and or will come into that clause. So where and will consider both the quas series, and or will consider either of the one met, then it will be considered as compliant. And similarly, we can have logical expressions as well, right? And while we create these calculation profiles, sometimes there can be missing the samples, right? So how do we want to treat the samples? Do we want to ignore, or do we want to consider those as down, right? So those kind of attributes can be set in the calculation profile creation. I'll come back to the quas active objects and SQL Query Editor at a later point of time. So once the operating period and calculation profiles are set, right? Let's go back to our service level agreement tab, right? Here, the starting point will be creating an SLA. As part of the creation of SLA, there are two workflows that are designed in SLM today. One is the classic approach, where we create the service level agreement from scratch with the defined SLOs and the cost constraints, which I'll demo it now. So let's say, for suppose, we are going to create a service level agreement for a data center availability. All right, so we can map this to a particular account if this is specific to a particular tenant, and then we can also create a group if at all this should be associated to a particular group, right? So let me say I want to create a group for availability agreements. And I can select this group, so that once the SLA is created, this SLA will be created on this group, and then I'll set the expected compliance percentage to be 99.9, and then the calculation method. So calculation method tells, okay, if there are more than one SLOs which are contributing for this SLA, what should be the calculation method of the SLA? Should it be the average of the compliance of all the SLOs, or it should be the best value of the SLOs? Similarly, the sequential, which is derived based on a formula, which is 100 minus what is the deviation, and then we cumulate it. And similarly, if at all we want to go with a weighted average, right? Say for suppose if we have two SLOs, in my use case, I'll take a tier 1 SLO and a tier 2 SLO, where I want to give more precedence to tier 1, right? So then I'll go with the weighted average, right? But if I want to give an equal weightage for all my SLOs, then I'll prefer going with the average, right? Similarly, if I want to go with the SLO with the worst performance, then I can select the worst calculation method, right? So here I'll be selecting average for now. And here you can see I can create the entire SLA form in a single go from this web page. So before that, I have to create some SLOs on the service level agreement. So I'm saving the metadata of the SLA now, and now I'll be adding the SLOs, right? So let's say I want to monitor or create a service level objective for my tier 1 VMs, right? And then I'll be adding the cost constraints under this SLO. So cost constraints are nothing but the actual cost data that we collect from our monitoring probes, right? So this will be the atomic part of our service level agreement. So this will actually contribute, each cost messages that we collect from the monitoring probes will actually contribute for SLOs and thereby to the SLAs. Okay. So now because we are talking about the availability of the virtual machines and thereby the data center, I'll go with the QoS Connect, which actually does a ping monitoring and then checks for the response time. And source is the device where the NetConnect probe is deployed. Target are my actual virtual machines for which I'm actually doing the availability calculation, right? So let me select these devices, and then I'll say it should always be equal to 1 because the device should always be up. We can also check what are the current actual data calculations from this drop down, and then the unit types, right? So because I'm talking about a ping monitoring, and because I'm talking about a tier 1, I'll consider it as 10 milliseconds for now. And as I said earlier, I covered the operating period, right? So I have added business hours, and I can always keep 24/7 as default. And if at all I want to add new, I need not go back to all the way to the previous screen that I have shown. I can simply add a new operating period from the context itself, right? So we need not navigate to multiple pages. And similarly, the calculation profile. So we can go with the default average interval. I'll go with the default one. But if at all we want to go with a custom calculation profile, we can again add it from here. Now let me save this cost constraint, right? And similarly, let me add another cost constraint from a different device. Let me select a different device now. I'll go with the same configuration. I'll go with an equals and I'll save it. Perfect. So now I have created a couple of devices as part of the tier 1 VM availability monitoring, right? Now this can be considered as an SLO. We can have more, good number of devices as part of this SLO, right? So there can be thousands of devices that can contribute for a single SLO as well. And then if at all we want to create any alarm notification specifically for this SLO, so even that can be configured from here. So say for suppose I'm talking about the tier 1 VMs, and if I'm unable to reach the compliance that is set in my SLA definition, and if I want to generate an alarm for that, so this widget will help us to configure that. So tier 1 VMs, I'll say compliance breach, right? And this will be critical for me because I did not meet the compliance. But even before the compliance breach, if I want to get a warning notification that, okay, so your actual compliance expected is say 90%, right? Or 99%. And if I want to get some kind of a notification, say at 99.99, then I can select the warning threshold as well. Okay, so that will help us in generating the warning threshold. And then I can add certain notes to this will actually help us when we generate the SLA reports, right? So what is this SLO is all about? And then, whether it has to be added into the report, right? So those kind of details can be entered into the notes widget. And then the calculation settings. So if at all we have multiple cost constraints that are contributing for a service level objective, what should be the calculation method should be like if this compliance percentage of this device is 100% and the compliance percentage of another device is 50%, then my compliance percentage of SLA should be average or the best or the worst. So that can be derived from the calculation method over here, right? And similarly, if at all I want to have a custom profile which I created through the calculation profiles, I can also select the profiles over here, right? I can select a custom profile, or as I said, because we are talking about a data series of clause, right? We can also select end clause or clause uh, based on the requirement, right? So for now, I'll go with the average compliance percentage of two cost constraints, and then the excluded periods. So excluded periods is slightly different from the operating period. So excluded period will actually let us to bypass the samples that can be excluded during the calculation. Say for suppose if the device is in a maintenance period and we did not put the device actually in the maintenance in UIM, but we know that the device is in a scheduled maintenance and we do not want to report that in our SLA report, then you can add that in the excluded period section over here. All right. So now I'll be saving my SLO. And then I'll be back to SLO. You can see the tier 1 VM's SLO has been created. Now I can create a quick another SLO over here for tier 2. Okay, and I can add another cost constraint. So just for demo purposes, I'll quickly add one more. I'm selecting source and target. And because this is tier 2, I'll keep a slightly higher value than tier 1. I'll go with the default operating periods and the calculation profiles. And I'll keep the remaining things as is. And this SLO is for the tier 2 VMs. Save the SLO and then back to SLA. All right. So now you can see there are two SLOs that have been created over here. And then you can actually set the alarm notifications for SLA level as well. So if at all you need an alarm that has to be generated when the compliance is breached at a SLA level rather than at an SLO level. So you can configure the alarm notifications over here. And then similar way, the way you are adding for the note section at the SLO levels, you can also add the note section at SLA level. You can set the calculation settings. So by default, so whenever a SLA is created, a job will automatically be created, right? So you need not worry about creating an external or explicit job again, right? Once the SLA is saved, you'll start seeing a SLA compliance calculation that happens, and you'll also see a job that will be scheduled to run. So here I have selected my compliance period at a month-on-month level. So you'll also see the job that calculates the compliance periods and reports for each month. And similar way, the way you can exclude the periods for SLO level, you can also exclude the periods at SLA level as well, right? So, all right. So now let me save my SLA. All right. So there is the availability that is calculated, right? So if you want to see the details of this, just go to view details and you'll see the actual definition that has been created. And if at all you want to see the report of this and how the performance of these SLOs, you can see the individual SLO objects. So currently my tier 1 VMs were, you know, are underperforming, and similarly the tier 2 VMs. If at all you want to drill down to each of these SLOs, just click on the service level objectives. And if you want to further drill down at a cost level, just continue doing at a cost constraint level, and you will be seeing the data at the cost message level as well, right? So here you can see uh, the cost unavailability. You can see over here this cause is unavailable during this period, so it is considered as a breach, right? And by the way, here we are talking about a threshold of 10 milliseconds, so that's why you are seeing the orange line over here, right? And then we are seeing that only 0.2% has met the overall compliance. I'll just show you some of the other SLAs that have been created before. For example, the SQL Server availability. So this is the reports of the existing SLAs. Just click on this. You can directly land up into the SLA report. You'll be able to see the availability of the SQL Server availability SLA. And then the expectation is 98%, but the actual achieved is 74.98. And these are the SLOs which are contributing, where SLO1 has met the compliance while SLO2 is not, right? And you can further drill down at SLO level and you can see which SQL Server DBs are not up, because of which your SLO compliance is getting no is getting at 50%, right? So yeah, so the reports are much more easy to navigate with this new version of SLM. Uh, the navigation is simple. Just from the left navigation key, you can click on a particular SLA report. You'll directly navigate to the uh, SLA report, and then you can also see the history of the performance of this SLA. So I have created this SLA on August 2021. So you can see the performance of this. So this is the history of the SLA, in which months it has breached, in which months it has actually fulfilled the compliance percentage. So those can be seen from the historical view. And now once the reports are generated, it's equally important that we have to share these reports to certain stakeholders. So that's where from the report section, you'll find three options: SLA report, SLO report, and full report. The reason we provide three levels is SLA report is for executive level, where we'll show a snapshot of the SLA performance and will not include the SLO or cost constraint performance, right? For example, this is a snapshot of the overall SLA performance, right? So it's a one-page document, but if at all we want to deep dive and generate a report, then the requirement suggestion is go to the SLO report, where you will actually get the SLO details as well. But if at all we want to also include the cost constraints along with the SLA and SLO performance, then the recommendation is to select the full report. All right. So now that I have demoed the classical way of creating a service level agreement, how can we automate this process when there are thousands of devices, right? So that's where the SLA based service comes into the picture. So create SLA based service is one of the option which is widely used in the service level management to automate the SLA creation. And this use case is something that will be very much beneficial when we are talking about a data center availability which is derived from thousands of devices, right? In that case, we cannot keep manually adding a cost constraint for each device, which I have done few minutes back, right? So in that case, the recommendation is navigate to the create SLA by service. Here, there are two workflows. One is the service level agreement creation based on the device metrics, which will be collected by our three probes: CDM, NT services, and processes. Or if we at all, our service level agreements are based on network related metrics, which are collected from say net connect or interface traffic, then the recommendation is to select the network, where you can enable the cost constraints based on the cost messages that are collected by net connect or interface traffic. So let me quickly create a sample, a service level agreement based on the network domain, right? Uh, so network agreements, so SLAs related to network monitoring. And then here you can, again, if it is associated to a specific account, you can map the account over here and you can set the compliance percentage. You can set the calculation methods, operating periods, and the compliance periods. similar to the traditional way of SLA creation. Click on next, and here, because we're talking about a kind of an availability monitoring in our use case, I'll stick to network connectivity, where we actually fetch the QoS data based on QoS underscore net connect definition, where we do a ping monitoring for the devices which we are monitoring. Now, one of the challenge in the earlier version of SLM was, okay, SLA by service is actually helping us to create the service level agreement for thousands of devices. But if the requirement is we want to create the SLA through the SLA by service for a group of devices instead of all the devices in the domain, right? So in that case, how can we do that? Either we have to do traditionally by creating an SLA manually by selecting individual hosts, or the earlier option which was present was we have to select the hosts, and these can be thousands of hosts that can be, right? So one implementation that work in progress is you can also start creating the SLAs based on a group of devices. And where this group is coming from? This group is coming from our operator console groups. So once we create a group from our operator console, we can actually leverage the same set of devices to be considered the SLA. So we need not worry about creating a SLA for all the devices which are unwanted. We can actually group the devices from the OC groups, and then with the integration that is available between the OC groups and the SLM, you can actually select the group which is having all the target devices and then click on next. So this is one enhancement that is coming up, and again this is an optional. The previous option exists as is. We can select host and we can select all the devices, or we can select a specific group of devices as well. Okay. And then, because the availability is something that I'm driving through the net connect, currently I'm not interested in the interface traffic. I'll click on next, and then I'm not interested in all the sources. I'll be only be interested from the probe which is deployed on this particular source, right? And then I'll finish this off. Now you can see that network agreements is the group, and then this is the SLA that has been created, and you can see the percentage is calculated, right? And if you see, these are the cost constraints which are automatically created. So none of these are manually created, right? So this way, service level agreements through service will help us to quickly create the SLAs. And now with grouping functionality, we can much more organize our cost constraints, which are actually impacting the service level agreements, rather than including all and then deleting which are unwanted, right? All right. So this is the two ways that will be available with respect to the SLA creation. Now quickly moving on to the two other functionalities, database management. So while we manage the SLAs, SLOs, and cost constraints from SLM, managing the cost definitions and the active objects plays an important role. Generally, these are the cost, if at all we go with the cost definitions, right? So what all are the list of cost definitions that are available in a given deployment? We need not actually get into a database table and query on SCOS definition table, right? So we can actually leverage the SLM functionality to see what all are the list of costs that are enabled in the given environment, right? And the filters and everything, we ensured that these are on par with what is there in the alarm viewer and inventory today. So similar kind of a usability we are trying to bring it up. You can see here, these are the list of cost definitions that are available in the deployment. If at all we want to see a specific set of costs, you can simply filter it out. Uh, you can see now all the list of GCP related cost definitions. You can see it over here, right? Uh, and then this cost definitions table will also help us to see what all are the list of cost definitions which are having more number of objects, right? So you can see over here, This column tells the object list, and then what are the ones which are occupying more amount of space, which clause is occupying more amount of space. And if at all we want to create a specific clause, we can create a custom clause from here. And then the clause active objects is the second layer with respect to the clause management. So after we manage the clause definitions, what all are the active clause objects in the environment? And there was also a issue that we addressed in this new SLM. If you see, the clause objects it has been rendered in less than 2 seconds to load approximately 500K records, right? And we are working towards making this response time constant, even if this goes to greater than 1 million records, because we actually implemented a lazy loading over here, right? So as you scroll down, you'll be able to see all the list of cause objects in your environment, right? And you can apply the filters if at all you want to see what are the list of cause objects specific to a probe or specific to a source or target. So that can be done using the filters. And then coming to the operations. So from the three dot menu over here, you can see what are the statistics of a particular cause. So that can be uh, seen. And then if at all you want to view, so if I say view data, right? So this will actually give me a cause viewer kind of a functionality where I can simply get the data of this particular cause object, right? So this is similar to a cause viewer, and I can also see the table view. What is the value of each of these samples? If at all max value is not supported, then that will not be rendered. All right. So similarly, we can perform other operations as well. We can view the statistics like, how many records are present as a raw data samples, and then when was the first sample that is collected, when is the last sample that is collected. This will actually tell that whether my object is really active or not, right? And how many samples are being collected in a given minute, right? So all this information can be seen from the statistics, right? And similarly, we can export the data, we can delete the objects, if we can change the origin of these cause objects. Yeah, so deletion of the data, it's much more simple. You can delete the data or you can delete the object. You can delete the historical data, or if at all you want to keep the data as is, but you want to invalidate it for a specific reasons, maybe because of the SLA calculations or whatever the reasons it could be. So instead of deleting the data, you can also invalidate the data. This will actually make the data samples to null. And if at all, what if at all you want to delete it for a specific duration, you can keep a start time and time for that, right? So these are some of the operations that you can perform. Update will actually refresh the active objects on your screen, right? All right. So there are much more operations which I did not cover, but those are very user friendly with the new US SLM and easy to navigate as well. So the last functionality that I would like to cover is the SQL Query Editor, which will definitely help all of us, especially in triaging the any kind of issues when it comes to the database access, right? So if at all we want to query certain tables because of any reasons, and then if at all customers do not have ready to use a database client, right? So then our recommendation is actually use the SQL Query Editor. We have been enhancing the SQL Query Editor from a long time, and you can query any of your custom queries and you can see the results over here. And even we are supporting multiple queries over here where you can actually see the record set in tabs. We are further beautifying it by removing this white space and to show more number of records and then exporting this data, right? So we hope that this new SLM is going to bring much more uh, usability in creating the SLAs, and then in managing the SLAs, and then generating the compliance percentages, creating the reports and sharing these reports with your stakeholders.